Maple Glen wasn't the kind of town you'd expect to make national headlines. Nestled in the wooded outskirts of Pennsylvania, it was a quiet, middle-class suburb where neighbors still left their doors unlocked and school bake sales filled weekend calendars. But on the morning of October 8, 2017, everything changed. At 7:42 a.m., a chilling 911 call shattered the town's serenity. There's blood everywhere. My mom is on the floor, and my brother did it. The voice belonged to 14-year-old Emily Carson, hysterical, breathless, and in disbelief. When first responders arrived at the Carson residence, a modest two-story home with Halloween decorations still hanging, they found 41-year-old Lauren Carson, a beloved middle school teacher, stabbed to death in the kitchen. Standing near her body, holding a bloodied knife with blank eyes and trembling hands, was her 12-year-old son, Ethan Carson. A town in shock. Ethan wasn't a troublemaker. He was quiet, polite, the kind of kid who flew under the radar. Teachers described him as average, if a bit withdrawn. He had no disciplinary record, no diagnosed behavioral issues. But in the early hours of that October morning, something had snapped. Neighbors watched from behind trembling curtains as officers escorted the boy away in handcuffs too large for his wrists. It was surreal, one neighbor told reporters. You don't expect to see a child arrested for murder. Maple Glen's tight-knit community quickly found itself divided. Some blamed poor parenting, others pointed to mental illness. Everyone asked the same unthinkable question: how could a child kill his own mother? The crime scene. Lauren's body had multiple stab wounds, concentrated in the upper torso. The medical examiner later ruled that she died from internal bleeding and a punctured lung. She had tried to fight back. Defensive wounds marred her arms. Nearby, a broken coffee mug and a toppled chair suggested a struggle. There were no signs of forced entry, and no one else in the home showed injuries. Emily, still in shock, told detectives that she had woken up to the sound of her mother screaming. By the time she reached the kitchen, the attack was already underway. Her brother didn't say a word. He just stood there, breathing hard, staring at what he had done. The weapon, a standard 8-inch kitchen knife, was part of a set on the counter. Nothing had been stolen. This wasn't a robbery gone wrong. It was personal, and it was horrifying. A chilling interrogation. Hours later, seated in an interrogation room with a child-sized chair and a detective trained in juvenile cases, Ethan finally spoke. She kept yelling, "I just wanted it to stop." He described a long-standing tension between himself and his mother. He said she always picked fights, was mean, and made him feel worthless. Investigators quickly learned that Lauren had recently taken away his PlayStation after failing grades came home, and had grounded him for skipping homework. But this wasn't simply about punishment or parental discipline. Something deeper was unraveling. "I didn't plan it," Ethan said. "It just happened." The way he described the act, robotic, emotionless, detached, shocked even the most seasoned detectives. There was no visible remorse, no tears, no confusion, just a quiet acceptance of what he had done. The system reacts. Prosecutors now faced a moral and legal dilemma. Should Ethan be charged as an adult? Under Pennsylvania law, children as young as 10 can be charged with criminal homicide. But the process of transferring a case from juvenile to adult court is complex and controversial. District Attorney Leah Warner announced they would seek to try Ethan as an adult, citing the brutal, intentional nature of the killing. This sparked outrage online and across cable news. Civil rights groups demanded leniency. Parents of Lauren's students demanded justice. Talk shows ran fiery debates over the state of parenting, video game violence, and the failures of mental health intervention. Within 48 hours, the hashtag Justice for Lauren was trending nationwide. But alongside it rose a more uncomfortable trend. Hashtag Free Ethan. People weren't sure who the victim really was. A murdered mother or a broken boy? The family dynamic. As investigators dug deeper, they uncovered troubling dynamics within the Carson household. Lauren, though well-liked at school, reportedly struggled with depression. Close friends hinted she could be controlling at home. Ethan's father had died in a car accident when Ethan was 6, leaving Lauren to raise both kids alone. Emily, the older sister, described their mother as strict but loving. But Ethan painted a darker picture, accusing his mother of verbal abuse and favoritism. Though no formal reports of abuse existed, school counselors noted Ethan had withdrawn socially in the months leading up to the murder. Was this a slow mental break, or the emergence of a violent mind? The media storm. News vans lined the Carson Street. True crime podcasts jumped on the story. YouTube channels dissected Ethan's facial expressions during court hearings. Some labeled him a cold-blooded killer. Others called him a child in crisis. Conspiracy theories spread. So did misinformation? Was Lauren hiding something? Had Ethan been abused? Was Emily lying? The internet wanted answers, and fast. But the truth wasn't clear, and the questions only grew louder. Was this an act of pure evil, or a tragic collision of childhood trauma and untreated rage? As Ethan sat behind bars awaiting trial, prosecutors and defense attorneys prepared for a high-profile legal battle that would question not just his guilt, but his very nature. Can a child like Ethan truly understand murder? Or was he born with something dark inside him? The courtroom would decide, but society was already judging. When news broke that 12-year-old Ethan Carson had brutally stabbed his mother to death, the country asked the same haunting question. Why would a child do this? In a world where murder is already difficult to understand, the idea of a child committing such a violent act strikes an even deeper nerve. Was Ethan born evil? Did he snap under pressure? Or was something medically, psychologically wrong with him? As Ethan sat alone in a juvenile detention facility, a team of experts assembled to determine exactly that. The psych evaluation begins. A month after the murder, Ethan was evaluated by forensic psychologist Dr. Karen Miles, known for her work with juvenile offenders in high-profile cases. Dr. Miles spent weeks conducting interviews, administering psychological tests, and reviewing Ethan's home life, school records, and medical history. Her findings were both unsettling and illuminating. Ethan exhibits signs of emotional detachment, low empathy, and deep-seated anger, her preliminary report stated. However, there is no conclusive evidence of psychosis or delusional thinking at the time of the murder. In simpler terms, Ethan knew what he was doing. He just didn't feel bad about it. Conduct disorder or something more. Dr. Miles diagnosed Ethan with conduct disorder, a serious behavioral condition often seen in children and teens who violate social rules and the rights of others. Symptoms can include aggression, deceitfulness, and a lack of remorse. But some experts feared the signs pointed toward a much darker path: early-onset psychopathy. Unlike adult psychopaths, identifying psychopathy in children is controversial. The traits, manipulativeness, shallow emotions, and cruelty, can sometimes overlap with normal adolescent behavior, but in rare cases they can signal a deeper, more dangerous disorder. We don't want to label a child as a psychopath, Dr. Miles said in a TV interview, but we also can't ignore the warning signs. Ethan's flat affect, his lack of remorse, his calm description of the murder. These were red flags. Still, many wondered, was this true evil, or trauma manifesting as rage? A look into Ethan's past. As the psychological evaluations continued, more details about Ethan's upbringing surfaced. He had struggled with grief since his father's sudden death. Though his sister Emily adapted well, Ethan seemed to grow darker each year. He became reclusive. He failed to make lasting friendships. He once killed a neighbor's cat, claiming it was already sick. That incident had been dismissed as a disturbing one-off. But now it seemed like a sign no one had taken seriously. Teachers recalled him drawing violent images in class: knives, blood, and what looked like someone hanging from a tree. He was always quiet, one teacher said, but there was something in his eyes, like he was somewhere else. His mother, Lauren, had taken him to a few therapy sessions after he got into a fight at school, but after 2 visits, she stopped going. The therapist later testified that Lauren didn't believe in mental illness. She called Ethan's behavior just acting out. What makes a child kill? Researchers estimate that juvenile homicide accounts for 7 to 8% of murders in the United States annually. But within that number, the cases where a child kills a parent, called parricide, are especially rare and complex. Psychologists have identified 3 major categories of child killers. Abused children, kids who kill to escape a violent or neglectful household. Severely mentally ill children, those suffering from delusions or hallucinations. Antisocial children, children with no remorse, who kill impulsively or out of anger. The question was, where did Ethan fit in? He didn't claim abuse, though he did say he felt controlled. He wasn't hearing voices. He wasn't hallucinating. And yet, he killed with terrifying precision and calm. His sister Emily continued to defend their mother. We had rules, like any house, but Mom wasn't mean. She loved us. She didn't deserve this. So was Ethan lying, delusional, or something else entirely? Public debate explodes. The story had become national news by now. True crime documentaries were already in production. The Carson case was the subject of op-eds and TV panel debates. Some viewed Ethan as a victim of a broken mental health system, a child failed by the very adults meant to protect him. Others saw a monster in the making, arguing that he should be locked up for life before he killed again. Even well-known criminal profiler Dr. Henry Wells, who helped catch multiple serial killers in his career, weighed in. If Ethan had been 18, no one would question this as a cold-blooded murder, he said. But because he's 12, we hesitate. That hesitation is human, but it doesn't change the danger. A mother's journal. As the trial date approached, a new piece of evidence changed everything. Lauren Carson's private journal. Discovered in a box in the attic by her sister, the journal spanned nearly 3 years. In its pages, Lauren detailed her struggles raising Ethan. She wrote about emotional outbursts, threats, and her growing fear of her own son. He told me once, "I wish you were dead," one entry read. I laughed it off, but he wasn't joking. Another entry from just a month before her death read, "Sometimes I wonder if he feels anything at all. He looks at me like I'm a stranger." The journal didn't excuse what happened, but it painted a clearer picture. Lauren had been afraid. And maybe, deep down, she knew something terrible was coming. The legal stakes. Back in court, Ethan's defense attorney now faced a near-impossible task. Convincing the judge and the public that his client, a 12-year-old killer, deserved compassion, not condemnation. "He is not a monster," the attorney told reporters. "He is a boy who broke, and the system must decide whether it will fix him or throw him away." The prosecution was unmoved. They believed Ethan was dangerous and would kill again if released. "This was not a crime of passion," the DA said. "This was cold, calculated murder." The legal system was about to be tested in a way that made everyone uncomfortable. As the courtroom filled with reporters and the jury was selected, the stage was set for a trial that would put childhood, crime, and justice itself on trial. Would Ethan be tried as a child with a future, or as a killer with none? Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Hit the notification bell. As Ethan Carson's trial date drew near, the air in Maple Glen, Pennsylvania was thick with dread. National networks had set up camp outside the courthouse. Hashtags like #MonsterOrMinor and #JusticeForLauren trended every week. Everyone had chosen a side. But then, everything changed. A locked box under the bed. 2 weeks before opening statements, Lauren Carson's sister, Ethan's aunt, returned to the family home to retrieve some personal belongings for the funeral service. While rummaging through Lauren's bedroom, she discovered something unexpected. A small, rusted metal lockbox wedged under the bed frame. It was heavy. Inside, wrapped in faded floral fabric, was a journal. Lauren's personal diary. Its contents would shake the entire case. Page by page, a hidden life emerges. The diary began innocently. Thoughts on work, parenting Ethan and Emily, musings about missing her late husband. But as the pages turned, the tone shifted. By mid-2016, entries hinted at deep distress. Ethan is changing. He doesn't smile anymore. He barely speaks. He flinches when I enter the room. I don't know what to do. Last night, I found bruises on his back. I asked him if someone at school hurt him. He just stared at me, silent. The bruises, the silence. The diary seemed to chronicle not just the struggles of a single mom, but the slow unraveling of a troubled household. Later entries took an even darker turn. Sometimes I scream at him. I know I shouldn't, but he doesn't listen, and I'm so tired. I slapped him today. Hard. He cried, but I didn't say sorry. What's wrong with me? He talks to himself now, says the walls whisper at night. He used to beg me not to leave the light off. Now he stares at the dark like it's speaking to him. The prosecution's narrative, that Ethan was a calculating, remorseless killer, was suddenly being challenged by Lauren's own words. The defense seized the moment. The courtroom turns. When the diary was introduced as new evidence, the courtroom turned into a war zone. Prosecutors objected, calling it irrelevant posthumous conjecture. But the judge allowed selected excerpts to be read aloud. A forensic psychiatrist for the defense took the stand. This is classic evidence of untreated childhood trauma compounded by potential early-onset psychosis. This child didn't act with malice. He acted from a broken, delusional mental state, possibly dissociative. The jury sat frozen. What had been painted as a clear-cut murder case now felt hauntingly complex. Was Ethan a monster? Or was he a child lost in a house of silent abuse and untreated mental illness? Emily testifies. Ethan's older sister, Emily, took the stand next. Her voice trembled as she recounted nights of screaming, dishes smashing, doors slamming shut. Mom wasn't evil. She was overwhelmed. But Ethan got the worst of it. She always said he reminded her of Dad, especially when he got quiet. And she hated that. The courtroom was silent as she continued. He never told anyone, not the teachers, not me. He just stopped being a kid. Tears streamed down her face. I don't think he even knew what he was doing that morning. The prosecution fights back. But the prosecution wouldn't let the narrative shift so easily. They brought in their own expert to argue. Even if we accept these entries at face value, they do not explain 12 stab wounds. That is not a mental break. That is rage. That is intentional overkill. They reminded the jury that Ethan never called 911, that he wiped the knife clean, that he hid in the garage, silent and alert, for nearly 3 hours before being found. This wasn't confusion. It was cold-blooded calculation. The most damning page. Then came the most explosive moment of the trial. In a mid-2017 diary entry, Lauren had written, "I'm scared of him. He stood over me last night with a butter knife. Said he was testing something. His eyes didn't look like my son's." Gasps echoed through the courtroom. Even the defense attorney's hands trembled. The prosecution pounced. There it is. Proof she feared him. He wasn't a victim. He was the threat. But the defense responded swiftly. Why didn't she get him help? If she was afraid, why didn't she take him to a doctor, a hospital, even a counselor? The jury was left with a gut-wrenching question. Was Ethan the product of trauma or the cause? The closing argument. As the trial came to a close, the defense made one final plea. If we believe children can be shaped by their environment, if we believe trauma rewires the brain, then we cannot treat a 12-year-old as if he were a fully formed man. Not in conscience. Not in justice. The prosecutor countered. But we must also ask, if we excuse this kind of brutality, where do we draw the line? Who speaks for Lauren? The courtroom was divided. So was the nation, a jury on edge. After 5 days of deliberation, the jury still hadn't reached a verdict. Rumors swirled of emotional breakdowns in the jury room, of disagreements over whether justice meant punishment or rehabilitation. And just as the judge prepared to declare a mistrial, a verdict was reached. The courtroom packed in. Reporters jostled for space. Ethan sat stone-faced. And when the foreperson stood, clutching the folded slip of paper that would decide his future, the words she read out loud would shock the nation. The jury deliberated for hours. Whispers filled the courtroom each time the door creaked open. Would they treat the accused as a child or a monster? At the heart of this high-stakes legal drama was not just a verdict. It was a question that echoed far beyond the courtroom. Can a child understand the weight of murder? The verdict heard round the country. When the judge called the courtroom to order, silence swept through the room. The defendant, a 13-year-old boy named Connor Fields, stood trembling. His defense attorney stood protectively beside him, while the prosecutor stared with quiet determination. The jury foreman stood. "We, the jury, find the defendant guilty of first-degree murder." Gasps rippled through the room. Connor's mother collapsed into sobs. The victim's family sat stoically, tears streaking their cheeks but showing no relief. Justice, as they saw it, had finally arrived. But the moment was only the beginning. The real firestorm was yet to come. The sentencing debate. Because Connor was a minor, the court faced an excruciating decision. Should he be sentenced as an adult or a juvenile? Prosecutors argued that the nature of the crime, planned, brutal, and carried out with a cold, methodical precision, warranted adult sentencing. Connor had broken into his best friend's home in the early hours of the morning and stabbed both parents to death. The motive? A deep-seated resentment he'd revealed in texts and journal entries. This was not a child lashing out in a moment of rage, the prosecutor told the judge. This was a calculated, premeditated double homicide. Society must be protected. The defense pushed back. He is 13 years old, the attorney argued. His brain is not fully developed. He cannot truly grasp the magnitude of his actions. He needs rehabilitation, not retribution. The judge delayed sentencing for weeks, requesting extensive psychological evaluations, interviews, and testimonies from neuroscientists, educators, and child development experts. The result? A nation divided. America reacts. The public outcry. As the media descended on the case, public reaction splintered. Some citizens called for compassion, citing the scientific research that showed adolescents are neurologically incapable of adult-level reasoning or impulse control. Social media became a battleground. A child doesn't wake up and kill without a reason. Where were the parents, the teachers, the counselors? One user posted, "Age doesn't erase accountability." Another responded, "If you can plan a murder, you can serve the time." Hashtags like #ConnorCase, #Justice for the Victims, and #KillerKids trended nationwide. True crime podcasts dissected the case in real time. TV news hosts invited psychologists and legal scholars for fiery debates. Even lawmakers took notice. In Washington, D.C., legislators began to revisit laws regarding juvenile sentencing. Should a child ever receive life without parole? Should age ever exempt someone from full accountability? The Connor Fields case had become a legal lightning rod. The neuroscience of evil? As public debate intensified, one factor complicated things even more: the MRI scans. As part of his psychological evaluation, Connor underwent brain imaging. The scans showed something startling: significant underdevelopment in the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for decision-making, impulse control, and understanding consequences. Experts testified, "This is typical of early adolescence. Connor's brain simply isn't wired for adult decision-making yet." But others pushed back. "There are millions of 13-year-olds with underdeveloped brains," a prosecutor said. "They don't commit murder." The discussion drifted from neuroscience into murky philosophical territory. What is evil? Can a child truly be evil? Or is evil only a label we give to acts we don't understand? Sentencing day, a nation watches. On the day of sentencing, the courtroom overflowed. Cameras were banned, but reporters lined the sidewalk outside. Protesters stood on both sides of the courthouse steps, some with signs that read "Children need help," not prison, and others that said "Life for a life." Connor was brought into the courtroom, wearing a navy suit that looked slightly too big. His wrists were shackled, a stark reminder that childhood innocence had long since evaporated. The judge's voice was steady. "After careful consideration, and in accordance with state law, I sentence Connor Fields to 35 years in prison." He will be eligible for parole after 25 years. Screams erupted from both sides. His mother sobbed. He's just a boy. The victim's family held each other tightly. This is still not enough, one whispered. Outside, news outlets scrambled to break the story. The headlines came fast. Teen killer sentenced to 35 years. Justice or injustice? Nation divided over Connor Fields. Can a child be evil? The question that won't go away. The fallout and the future. In the weeks that followed, interest in the case did not fade. It exploded. Connor's case was cited in congressional hearings on juvenile justice reform. Multiple states introduced bills aiming to ban life sentences for minors. Documentaries were announced. Books were pitched. Hollywood came knocking. But amid all the noise, the families involved tried to carry on. Connor's family appealed the sentence, though it was denied. He was moved to a juvenile detention center to begin serving his time, but after he turned 18, he would be transferred to an adult prison. He wrote letters to his siblings, apologizing. "I don't know why I did what I did," he wrote. "I just felt so angry. I wanted the world to hurt like I did." The victim's family started a foundation in their memory, aimed at preventing youth violence through education and early intervention. And the rest of America kept watching, asking, and arguing, closing the chapter but not the conversation. Connor Field's story is not just about one child, one crime, or one courtroom. It's about the way we see children, crime, and culpability in a changing world. As a society, we are left with hard questions. How do we balance justice with mercy? Where does accountability end and rehabilitation begin? And most haunting of all, can a child ever be truly evil? As long as cases like this continue to unfold, so will the debate. The final chapter awaits, but the search for answers may never truly end. By the time the court adjourned for sentencing, the courtroom was no longer just a venue for legal arguments. It had become the stage for a national reckoning. The stories of young killers like Lionel Tate, Jordan Brown, and Mary Bell had flooded social media, classroom debates, and dinner tables. Could a child truly be evil? Or were they products of a society that had failed them? The jury was no longer just in the courtroom, it was everywhere. The divide, public versus judicial opinion. In many of these controversial cases, the courts rendered one verdict, while the public gave another. In the case of Lionel Tate, who was initially sentenced to life without parole for the 1999 murder of 6-year-old Tiffany Unick, the sentence shocked the world. Lionel was only 12 years old. The public outcry forced the system to reconsider, and his conviction was eventually overturned, though his troubles with the law didn't end there. For many, he was the perfect example of a child who had been swallowed up by a justice system not built to comprehend youthful impulsivity or underdeveloped morality. On the other hand, cases like that of Joshua Phillips, convicted at 14 for murdering an 8-year-old neighbor and hiding her body under his bed, left many unsure whether compassion or caution should guide legal outcomes. Joshua was given life without parole, a ruling that still holds despite multiple appeals. The final verdict in these cases was not just a sentence, it was a signal to parents, teachers, lawmakers, and communities that justice for juvenile killers is not black and white. Can they be rehabilitated? The idea of rehabilitation is a central pillar in juvenile justice, but in practice, it's incredibly complex. Youths who commit serious crimes are often placed in maximum security juvenile facilities or transferred to adult prisons where therapy, education, and reform programs are minimal. Despite this, some do change. Take the story of Mary Bell. After serving 12 years for the murder of 2 toddlers in England, she was released and given a new identity. By many accounts, she lived a law-abiding life, raising a daughter of her own. Mary's life post-prison presents a challenge to the notion that child murderers are beyond redemption. Still, critics argue that rehabilitation is a gamble society can't afford to lose. One failure means another tragedy, legislative changes, and ongoing debates. The controversy has sparked significant legislative reform. The U.S. Supreme Court's rulings in Roper v. Simmons, 2005, Graham v. Florida, 2010, and Miller v. Alabama, 2012, collectively banned the death penalty for juveniles and limited life without parole for minors. These were monumental shifts in how the system views the culpability of children. But legal battles continue. Many states still sentence minors harshly, and families of victims argue that the severity of the crime, not the age of the perpetrator, should dictate punishment. The psychology of evil nature versus nurture. Experts remain divided on the root causes of extreme juvenile violence. Are killer kids born with a darkness inside them, or is it environmental conditioning? Psychiatric evaluations often reveal trauma, neglect, abuse, or neurological disorders, but they don't always explain the unimaginable choices these children make. The concept of evil is largely moral and philosophical. But from a legal standpoint, intent, understanding, and premeditation remain key. A 10-year-old who stabs his parent might not understand the permanence of death, while a 14-year-old who stalks, plans, and kills could be seen as operating with adult-like awareness. This gray area is where the courts struggle, and where public empathy collides with outrage. Moving forward, a call for balance. As we conclude this deep dive into the legal and moral dimensions of children who kill, one thing is clear: the system is still evolving. These cases force us to confront uncomfortable truths about childhood, justice, and the capacity for cruelty. Can a child be evil? Maybe the better question is, can a society that ignores the warning signs, fails to intervene early, and chooses punishment over rehabilitation be any less culpable? In the end, each case is a mirror reflecting our collective responsibility. And whether we choose to see monsters or misunderstood youth in those mirrors will shape the future of justice. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Hit the notification bell.